And we are now live streaming on YouTube.
All right, it is almost 6:33. I was just saying to Melissa, the biggest drawback for having meetings at Zoom is that it's hard for me to connect and remember faces. And so I welcome if we were with each other a month and a half ago, and my name is Nate Trevethan. I work for Michael Van Valkenburg Associates. We are landscape architects from Brooklyn, New York, and we also have an office in Cambridge and Denver, Colorado. I'm a Michigander, so it always kind of warms my heart, and I get extra excited about when I get the chance to work on projects in Michigan. And over the last, let's say 5 years, I've found myself in Michigan quite often. I still have family in Ann Arbor, both my parents and my in-laws, and so I'm grateful to share the evening with you all, and kind of show you our initial kind of ideas for Chevy Commons. The group is relatively small tonight, at least at a couple minutes past the start time. So I would like to keep this as informal as possible. You're all muted right now, but if you have any questions, I would say that you should just maybe make a note in the chat, if that makes sense. And we will try to, maybe we hold big questions to the end, but if something doesn't make sense and you want me to repeat myself or explain something more clearly, just let us know and we'll keep marching and see where we get. All right, so this is the second input session, and kind of the general outline of where we're headed tonight is we'll talk about the context of Chevy Commons, and then fairly quickly we will go through what we heard from the group in November, and then we will show you a series of ideas for the park that we hope are based on a lot of the things that we heard from you all. And then at the end, we'll open it up to, there are a series of 4 questions, but really, again, because our group is small, let's have a chat at the end and kind of talk through your comments and your concerns and your hopes and see where we go. All right, so to start off, when we look at park spaces, we like to take an inventory of adjacent parks, adjacent greenways. And I think the thing that struck me about, and this isn't all of Flint, but this is your river, and this is your series of parks that are associated with the Flint River and the series of creeks that lead into the Flint River. So there's already this existing kind of network of parks, and that Chevy Commons kind of sits right in the middle of that network. And then what makes it even kind of more interesting is that you have these series of greenways like the Genesee Valley Trail and the Flint Riverfront Trail, and then the Grand Traverse Greenway and the Iron Bell Trail that's in the works and coming up soon. So you have this very kind of interconnected kind of nexus of park space and greenways. And Chevy Commons really does kind of sit right in the heart of all of that. It's also worth kind of looking at, as a landscape architect, to use the term program, which is kind of jargon for things that you would do in a park. So we like to look at kind of, again, an inventory of the different park spaces and the greenways around Chevy Commons and kind of what there is to do in these parks. I probably don't have this all exactly right. You probably can find a lot of little holes to pick at in the things that we're saying you can do in the parks. But one kind of observation that I'd like to make is that while the parks are very connected, there's not a lot of active recreation in some of these park spaces. There is lots of active recreation in the schools and at the kind of private institutions like or Kettering and kind of in Flint Catholic High School. But in the parks themselves, there's tennis courts, there's a couple baseball fields, but in general, kind of probably the biggest park use that I'm seeing is kind of walking trails and biking trails. And again, that's not to diminish anything because the network itself is quite exciting. And a lot of places don't have a series of parks that are connected as well as yours. But so we don't want to talk about the big picture tonight, but we talk about the big picture because it's worth, as we think about Chevy Commons, and we think about what Chevy Commons could be in the future, what is missing potentially from some of those other park spaces that we can accommodate in Chevy Commons. So think big to kind of focus on the 60 acres of Chevy Commons. Let me see what one thing in the chat is. Okay, we can get to that later. But we'll come back to that. So also one last kind of big picture map, again, maybe this is more important for me than for you all because you live here, is that it's also important to kind of remind ourselves how big things are and how long it takes to get from place A to place B. And the thing, again, that's pretty exciting about all this is within a 20-minute walk or a mile, you can get many places from Chevy Commons. So we think that where it's situated has great premise and great promise for the future of Flint. Ooh. All right, so park those maps in the back of your head and maybe we'll kind of think back on that later on. So in November, we asked a series of questions and I won't read them to you. You can read them if you'd like, but we'll kind of highlight a couple of them and then actually what we heard from you all. And I think what we heard is probably more important than restating the question. Oh. Okay, I will gotta go through these quickly though. And I also was able to see some of the results of the public polling from previous public engagement sessions as well too. So some of this is direct data from what we heard in November and some is kind of folded in from what we've heard in the past too, because we've heard things before. And so it's nice to hear them reinforced. But so this is the top 10 list of things that you all were hoping for in Chevy Commons. Boating and access to the river, that was the first. And the second one kind of, it repeats itself a little bit through the list, but park elements to enhance human comfort. So to me, that means things like benches and lighting and security and trash cans and drinking fountains. Number 3 were public restrooms. 4 was lighting. So you can kind of see what I mean about things kind of repeating themselves a bit. Number 5 was places to gather. 6 was kind of enhanced but accessible and multi-use trails. 7 was shade. And I think that's a pretty keen observation. And it also goes right back to the notion of human comfort. But a lot of the young trees in Chevy Common right now leave it a very sunny and hot place. It certainly was when I was there over the summer. 8 was innovative play for all ages. 9 was places to purchase food and beverage. And 10 was drinking fountains. And again, I'll just kind of skim through this, but other items that came up, but not as kind of frequently, splash pad, park pavilions, exercise facilities, places for festivals and programming, river restoration, dog run, fishing, barbecue grills, parking, skate parks, swings, basketball, outdoor sports, Water Crisis Memorial, and Public Art. I've missed a few, but that you get the gist of it. So those items came up less frequently. The first group came up quite a bit. All right, so over the summer, we were asked by the Mott Foundation to begin to generate a conceptual plan of kind of like the next life of Chevy Commons. And so this is a park map, what you all have today, 60 acres. I don't know the exact kind of linear feet of trails, but there are a number of trails that have kind of grown as the park has grown through phases. It's mostly a meadow right now and then fairly substantial tree planting. And I would say that the transformation from a GM auto facility to a park is remarkable. So in and of its sense, like over the last 10 years, the transformation is substantial. But so it's exciting when we get to come up with kind of new ideas and kind of how this park will kind of better serve Flint and Genesee County. Okay, so this is one of the specific questions that we asked last time, and I'm showing you this partly because it has visuals, but it also begins to get at, I guess, park character. So we asked, well, so what was the most important thing to add to the Flint Riverfront now? And specific results that we got were, and again, I'm only going to highlight probably the top 4 here. So in the lower left corner, you have a playground with water play. Right adjacent to that, you have lawn with places to sit. Number 13 is a photograph of the Flint River and people kayaking and canoeing. And then right above the kayak and canoeing, you have a shaded trail with meadow and kind of, but very lushly planted. Again, active recreation didn't get so much love. Hockey and places for exercise. And then also the notion of a places to barbecue did get fairly good marks. The next series of images and the results there, again, high marks for walking trails with meadow and trees and flowers. That's upper left. There were high marks for a skate park and bird watching. And then right under the skate park is an event lawn where people could gather to watch movies or a concert in the summer. So lawns were a popular hit, trails, bird watching, and a skate park. All right, so that was what we heard in November. So what I'm going to do is this is where we actually get to do a little bit of show and tell with you all. This is a map. The other observation that we made was that you're probably not going to redevelop the whole 60 acres, or I shouldn't even say redevelop. You are not going to add to the whole 60 acres at once. And the part of Chevy Commons that we thought was the best place to start was the area kind of east of Stevenson Street. So here's, and I'll draw on top of this and make this a little bit messy, but just to clarify. So here's Stevenson. And you have the Genesee Valley Trail that does something like that. So our observations were, we've understood that Stevenson Street and the bridge specifically over the Flint River has structural issues. And it's also very, very low trafficked and happens to cut the park in about a third. So one thing that we would like to explore is the notion of removing Stevenson Street and using the bridge for people only. the next kind of constraint that we see on this parcel of land is that the Genesee Valley Trail, again, really bisects the property in half. And so we would like to look at the notion of moving it, not removing it, but just moving it so it's not right in the middle of the space. And then finally, the last kind of fairly decent constraint that, as you all know, are the existing kind of concrete barrier that line the channel of the Flint River. And we'll talk quite a bit more about that later, but we've also been trying to figure out a way to kind of accommodate people's desire to get to the river, bring the water into the site maybe, but in a way that's responsible given the former uses on the property. So, and maybe what I'll do here, I may draw on this again just to help kind of talk you through some of this. Like, now I've lost my cursor. That's not good. All right, so the first thing that I mentioned before was the notion of removing Stevenson Street. So we would like to keep the bridge, but instead of Stevenson Street, we would like to carve a valley that follows kind of the topography that's there now, but make this big park entrance from all the way from Kearsley down to the river. And one thing that we like about this also, in keeping the bridge for pedestrians, is that all of a sudden you have these two new park entries on both sides of the river that are not impacted by cars. The other, so we'd like to make a valley. We would like to make two new entries and repurpose the vehicular bridge that's there now. The other piece of this is that we're interested in moving the Genesee Valley Trail so it doesn't cut right through the middle of the space, but it kind of comes a little bit closer to Kearsley, so it opens up the center of the space for other park uses. All right. Oh, too far. Okay, so after we carve the valley and we repurpose the bridge, we were interested in adding a piece of topography kind of right in the center of that space. Now you're beginning to see why we were wanting to move the Genesee Valley Trail. But this hill would be both for performances in the summer, kind of that image that I was showing you earlier, and I'll show you in a second, but it also could be used in the winter as a sledding hill. It would be lawn, and so there's kind of a high point here and a low point kind of right at the base of the bridge that crosses the Schwartz Creek and the Flint River. And then at the same time, we would like to add a playground and a second bridge connecting Chevy Commons to the parking lot at Atwood Field. And right as you kind of come over that bridge, we would like to have a large place with grills which we're calling a barbecue terrace, that would look over the confluence of the river and the creek, kind of toward downtown. And you would have the hill behind you and the play area. And then finally, we would like to add a series of sport courts. So it could be basketball courts, it could be volleyball, but along Kearsley Street, kind of adjacent to the GM Tool and Die, kind of in between Kearsley and the relocated Genesee Valley Trail. I'm going to check the chat just to make sure I'm not losing anybody yet. Yes, bicycles would definitely be able to use the bridge on Stevenson. Okay. So here is this is a picture of one of our projects. I'm sorry if you've seen this one before. You did in a small format before, but But this is Brooklyn Bridge Park. This is roughly a 3-acre lawn that looks out over New York Harbor. Well, what we're proposing is something similar here. And if you can imagine, instead of Lower Manhattan in the background, you would have downtown Flint. But again, it's a place where it's flat enough that it's comfortable, people could sit on. Another thing you could do here is you could throw a Frisbee or kick a ball around if there wasn't a performance happening. And then we'd like to kind of bring this new network of trails kind of in and around all of these different park programs. And again, trees are important. We'd like to have shade, but we're also but you'll see this in a bit, we're proposing a slightly more complicated and complex series of paths. And so when we begin to imagine program in a city park, the important thing is that there's something for everybody. It sounds like a tall task, but what we do as human beings in a park, it's kind of a limited set of things. But the most important thing is that we make everyone feel welcome. And that's if you're 16 years old, that's if you're 63 years old, and that there's something to do and make you comfortable, no matter how old you are or what walk of life you're from. So that's kind of our big aspiration for kind of some of these kind of bigger park gestures. The one other question that we talked a lot about, we talked about in November, and we've talked quite a bit about, is making a large playground within Chevy Commons for the kids of Flint and the county. So, and what we asked back in November is what ways incorporating play into Chevy Common have the most appeal? And what we found out was that kind of by far, the notion of nature-based play, so play that doesn't necessarily take the form of kind of typical playground equipment, was by far kind of the most appealing to the group we talked to previously. And so we've been drawing some things, and we've been collecting images. And so this is a series of, and again, if this seems like generally a good direction to head with some of this, we will flesh this out a little bit further before we hand off a concept plan. But the notion of incorporating trees and shade, and another important piece about playgrounds is that they need to be challenging for all ages of kids. You need to accommodate a 2-year-old, and you need to accommodate a 12-year-old. So we would like to make a playground in Flint that probably is pretty unique. It's something that everyone will be proud of. And it may not look to you immediately like a traditional playground, but we think that there's been some pretty exciting developments in nature play and kind of different products that we can use, and kind of our experience from working on playgrounds around the country to do something special here. This was kind of a pretty interesting thing. This is it's a series of trampolines that you can jump on. That's kind of up in the canopy of a tree. It's actually not that high, but the notion of kind of interacting with trees and nature while you're playing, I think, is pretty exciting to us. Okay, so we talked about, so the kind of the structuring elements again are the valley, the hill, the play area, but then we're talking about a series of kind of paths that kind of connect all of these different elements within the park. We're proposing that we keep the parking area where it is, and we may need to expand it a little bit in the future, but we'd also like the notion of being able to park at Atwood Field if we add, well, first of all, if the bridge at Stevenson really is just a pedestrian bridge, and potentially making another connection to Chevy Commons directly from Atwood. We think there's there could be some shared parking. And then, so a new series of pathways. And again, we're able to kind of reinvent a lot of the path structure that's there because of taking out Stevenson and Genesee Valley Trail. And then like program elements, again, a lot of these kind of go back to the notion of human comfort, but so places to sit in the sun and tables and place to barbecue, place to fish along the river, and we'll get into that a little bit more shortly. And again, I will come back to any of these slides later on when we kind of chat through all of these things in a little bit. Okay, so I think one of the most challenging pieces about Chevy Commons is the Army Corps embankment. So that concrete trapezoid that forms the banks of the Flint River. I have to say right off the bat that it is performing a lot of service to this site also, and that may not be initially apparent. It serves as a cap for the remnants of industry that are in the soil underneath Chevy Commons. So the kind of the gut reaction is like, wow, let's try to figure out how we could potentially remove the wall. That may not be the smartest thing to do. So I think the trick for us as designers is to find ways of preserving some of these industrial artifacts that do kind of perform an environmental function here, but find ways of kind of beginning to create nature and to create a natural river within the structure of this channel and the park. So what we'll do is I'll spend a few minutes talking through kind of our initial ideas there. So the first thing is we have to work, so there's the base flow of the river on a normal sunny day. And then the river channel itself fills up after different rain events. So we've probably all heard of 100-year storms and 2-year storms and kind of what that means. And the interesting thing is that even with a 2-year storm, which, as we all know, happens more often than every 2 years, but that base channel fills up almost 8 feet. So what we were proposing is a series of pools or wetlands on the park side of the concrete embankment, but that are hydraulically connected to the river. Another thing that we're exploring is the notion of creating and I'm gonna draw on this so you can see where I'm talking about. An underground like trench or a drain that will stop the flow of groundwater kind of into and through Chevy Commons. And what this drain would do, this is like it's kind of just a silly hole or trench that's full of gravel. I'm kind of overly simplifying it. But as groundwater comes this way, and then through the site to the river, it would catch it as it's cleaner and find a way to put the groundwater discharge into Schwartz Creek as opposed to into the Flint River. We know it's all going to kind of get there, but if anything we can kind of do to kind of mitigate that flow of water through Chevy Commons, the dirt in Chevy Commons is a good thing. All right, so so we'd like to create a series of kind of connected wetlands along the edge of the river. They're big enough that you could fish in them. We think that they have kind of high habitat value, and they begin to create this, it's kind of funny, but it begins to create this natural edge to Chevy Commons that works with the concrete channel. Okay, so these are not technical drawings. These are diagrammatic. But they are a series of cross sections. So you can see, and we're showing half of the river. So here's the river and the concrete channel, and you can see the concrete embankment. This is, I'm going to go, I don't know if I can go back the way my computer's acting. All right, so you can see this here. There's 1, 2, and 3. So we're going to start with 1, and we're going to work our way downriver. The second one is going to be at the Stevenson Street Bridge, and then we'll be just past the Stevenson Street Bridge. So the first one is, the site is relatively flat now. And so this is a before, and this is after. So you can see where that large kind of pool is built on the park side of the existing retaining wall and the revetment. The interesting thing about kind of the storms that I was talking about earlier is, so I guess before I say that, 2 other important things to note here. There's a kind of a thin dashed pink line. That's the groundwater line. And then there's a black dashed line, which is the existing grade. So you can see we're actually cutting down, but we're not cutting down below the groundwater. So the interesting thing about the 2-year storm, for instance, is you can see how the river filled up. And then what we can do is actually have some sort of connection. For the purposes of this diagram, it's a pipe that would actually bring river water at the 2-year storm and flush this pool of water. So every time you have a 2-year storm, you get a new push of water that kind of works its way in through that chain of connected of pools and wetlands. And then on the left side of the screen, you can begin to see that the hill that we were proposing for events and sledding. You also see that we have light poles. Again, so kind of hitting on some of those elements that you all have requested over the years. Here's the second before. This is at Stevenson. So this is actually cut through the roadway at Stevenson. I should probably add a car here or a truck for clarity. And then the after here is, again, there's not water in this one, but turning that bridge into pedestrians and bikes. You have a landing plaza, and then kind of taking out that roadway, and it turns into, this is a piece of that, of the Lawn Valley. River related here, we've also kind of talked about the idea of, could you have in some places cantilevered walkways that are actually constructed onto the concrete embankment so that you could actually begin to actually move along the concrete while we're still keeping it in place. And then this is the third before and after. So this is just on the downstream side of Stevenson Street. And you actually have, this is one of the areas where you actually have a staircase that kind of, there are a series of stairs that go up and down the concrete embankment. But if you remember back to the diagram, the pools kind of got smaller, but there became more of them. So again, we would fill these with either river water or with runoff from the landscape in the park itself. But you can see, you kind of go from something that's fairly simple in its form. You have a path, and you have the wall, and you have a meadow, to something that's pretty complicated. So we find that we actually think some of this is pretty interesting. And then here, this is just a series of precedent images of things that we think that those pools could look like. This is actually from the mouth of Lake Erie, in Lake Erie Metro Park in Gibraltar. This is also Lake Erie Metro Park, but you could actually have a little dock that could be near one of these pools. And we're always interested in kind of adding to the complexity of the planted landscape. And so this kind of notion of a wet meadow, and then you can kind of see some topography. And to be sorted out, but there would definitely be a series of trails through these kind of this new watery edge of the park. We should put guardrails on them, keep people safe, but also kind of just the notion that they can be quite beautiful in the winter also, which is important when you're thinking of park building in Michigan. Okay, so this is a summary of kind of all of those different components. Again, you see the valley and the hill and the playground and kind of that new edge. And again, we're not proposing taking out the concrete. Everything here is above the groundwater that's there, and there are safe ways of capping and building topography and cutting into what's there. But I think the thing that the feedback that will be important to hear from you all tonight is something like this would not happen all at once. And we need to begin to set priorities of the things that we think are the most important and the most interesting to you all. And so then we can begin to kind of develop different phases, or if things, and you all may tell us something fascinating tonight, and we begin to change what we've drawn already also. So here's kind of the base plan. And then again, kind of a layer of tree planting on top, so that you get these kind of very shaded walkways, and you get the shaded backside of the hill. But it's also important that we kind of factor security into this always. And by that, I mean, it's important that you be able to see into and out of the park always. Kind of open lines of sight are very important. And we don't take any of that lightly. I realize what I'm saying. I'm showing you something that has lots of curves and lots of, it may not necessarily appear open, but it's also a fairly big site. And so we think that we can add complexity in a way that has kind of that visual security that we need to include. So it'd be fun to talk through kind of the notion of what you all think are priorities, and because this is a park for you all, and so it's important for us to hear what you all think. So then there's kind of a second layer of things that we could add on top, but I think the structuring elements are most important to us, because some of these other things I'll talk about really could come in the future. And the first of those is the notion of, I mentioned sport courts or hockey rink or basketball along Kersley. And one thing that we can do to kind of, something that we often try to do with park making is extend the seasons. And that's kind of a weird thing to say, but if we can have a place like, so what we're proposing here is just putting a simple cover or a roof structure with open walls over the basketball or roller rink or hockey, so that you could actually play there in a protected environment probably 4 months out of the year. We realize it'll get cold, but if a place is dry and it's not covered with snow, the likelihood that you find kids bouncing a basketball or playing a game together is pretty high, even if the temperatures go down. So with that's a possibility. We talked about that additional bridge to Atwood. And then the other thing too, and this goes back to kind of that initial observation about what there is to do in the parks and around Chevy Commons, is within some of these meadows, we could have not official fields, but we could kind of carve out places for a pickup soccer game or So we wouldn't be proposing large lights or stands but a place that you could kind of gather with friends and play sports. So this is another picture of Brooklyn Bridge Park, but this is a converted warehouse building that has 6 basketball courts under it. And like, as I mentioned, even if the temperature goes down into the 20s, there are still kids out playing basketball. And also, I haven't talked to you much at all about the part of the park that's the 2/3 of the park, really, on the western side of Stevenson Street. And a lot of that we think should kind of stay as it is today. We may propose some supplemental planting. We've also kind of talked about the notion of, because Chevy Commons is so well connected to the regional greenways, is this like a possibility of adding a kind of a technical bicycle course for kids? We realize that it's too small for a technical course for adults, but we do want to we want kids to be comfortable and have stuff to do. And then but the other thing that we would definitely consider doing is adding a comfort station to the western side of the park. And comfort station, I mean bathrooms. Maybe there's a vending machine that you could buy something to drink. It's pretty low key, but seems like something that would be kind of well used. This is the Dte Energy Trail in Chelsea. Again, we realize this would not probably be a place for adults, but there is space to do something like this for kids. So before we kind of open up the discussion, I think I zoom back out to kind of the network of parks in Flint, and kind of, I think based on the feedback from you all and kind of where would be helpful the conversation goes tonight, is thinking about things that we can do at Chevy Commons that complement the full park system. So there can be things that we find in all the parks, but I think that Chevy Commons is also unique enough in its size that you have the opportunity to do some pretty special things. And so it's going to be good to talk to you about that. So also, please note on the bottom here, if you would rather not speak tonight and you would rather email now or later, you don't have to do this now, but my email address is at the bottom and I'll circle it so you can all see it. Here's my email down here. I'll actually spell it out for you too. But so you're more than welcome to provide feedback that way as well. My email is NTRE, V as in Victor, THAN at MVVAINC.com. It's not going to go away, so don't worry. There's too many V's and T's in my name and my work email, so I apologize for the mouthful. Okay, so did not mean to do that. All I wanted to do was delete the circle. Getting there. 2 years of Zoom and I still mess up all the time. Okay, so, and again, we don't, because we're around 20 people probably. It would be great if this was a conversation. But I'll read to you these kind of 4 kind of prompting questions. And I'd like kind of start here, but we can also kind of drift away from this as well. But where in Flint have you seen something similar to the hill the play knoll, the network of paths, the riparian edge, and the sports pavilion that you like, and why? And what stands out about that place to you? The second question is, what elements of the hill, the play knoll, the path networks, the riparian edge, and the sports pavilion are important to you or not? What do you think is missing from the hill, the play knoll, the network of paths, the riparian edge, and the sports pavilion? And then finally, what additional or complementary park uses should we consider adding based on kind of those structuring elements? Okay, so I know that Melissa needs to unmute each of you. I see Crystal there has a question. Maybe we start with you, and I will do my best to get back into the chat and hit some of those things as well.
Thank you for the presentation, Nate. I really appreciate it. And I just wanted to say, I think that it makes good sense to do the developments in the areas that you're pointing out on the east side of the park. That makes sense to me. I saw in the chat someone was asking about the removal of Stevens Street, how that might affect emergency vehicle access to Hurley. And I think that's a valid question. But aside from that, that street is so dead. So I think that's a great way to really use the space wisely. I can't really prioritize any of the 4 or so features that you were saying. I think they're all great, so I can't really pick one over the other. But I will say 2 things. One, the sports pavilion, I can absolutely see also becoming an event space where events like maybe Chevy in the Hole or the nonprofit that I run, Flint Handmade, or Kettering, you know, could even potentially use that space for pop-up events in the park. And so I think that's a really nice bonus feature of that. The other thing I'm going to say, because it's what I'm here to say, is that I'd really love to see a dog park. I understand that this area is probably not the best place for it, but maybe on the western side near the current parking would be a really easy way to put some fencing in and have a dog park without interrupting the natural features as much. So that's my feedback, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Nick, hi.
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation. I think these are all wonderful ideas. I think for me, the most important piece at this time would probably be those entryways. So the pedestrianized bridge there in Stevenson is a wonderful idea. Connects directly to some of those new trails in the road adjacent to Kettering. And I think the biggest innovation here is really just thinking about that long-term security access. And for the folks that are concerned about sightlines, are concerned about call boxes, because the area is in transition currently. And there's just not a lot of youth there. It doesn't feel like a very friendly space as it is. So just incorporating some of those elements into the long-term design, I think, are important considerations.
And I mean, lighting, new entries will all go a long way to make the park feel more inviting also.
Yeah, and if I could just add one more thing, I know often when we think of these big projects, we think 10, 15 years down the road in terms of some of these maintenance costs and some of the replacement costs as things get vandalized or wear out over time. And I just would keep that in mind. It's been a consistent issue with projects like Riverbank Park, with our inflatable dams in the past. They were supposed to create pressure throughout the parks, and we ended up with these kind of passageways downtown that were just empty and overgrown. So there's a lot of consistent issues with maintenance that I think just need to be considered as we undertake some of these bigger projects. Thank you.
Well, and I mean, I don't have all the maintenance answers to tell you tonight, but it is in the back of our mind always when we're thinking through projects like this. And I know that there have been discussions about kind of setting up endowments for maintenance for these parks. So I think that the conversations have been spot on. So please know that everyone's comments about maintenance, they're definitely kind of percolating in what we're doing. Jack.
Hi, thanks. Really appreciate this, Nate. And the one thing I'd like to just bring up is, and it goes actually to the last comment, was encouraging children to come to the space. And I speak now about like educational opportunities. So where there's ways where maybe even classroom or educational types of settings can occur, the spaces that you're creating perhaps will work real well for that. But even getting kids right into the river, there's a lot of that going on with the green, some of the green initiatives that are occurring where we can then use the river, use the space for educational purposes so that the classroom teacher can take youth down to the river and really engage with the space, the park. That's all.
Thank you. Sarah, and then we'll go to Neil and Mary Beth.
Hi there. I think officially in my role at the Watershed, I have to push for development of the riparian edge. But if we're talking about bringing more people to the park, getting it more utilized, and just getting people excited about the space, I think focusing on the play knoll would be a really good idea. Kids are friendly. You know, if there's a bunch of kids and a bunch of families in the park, other people are going to feel comfortable using it. And I think the idea of something like a new innovative nature-based play area is going to be attractive to families. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
A couple items. We are not opposed to dogs. We are just opposed to large dog parks. And an example would be in Flushing. They have a nice park there. They created a dog park, but it pretty much gutted out the entire center section of the park. It's way too large, and it does affect the deer and the other wildlife in that park. We hike a lot throughout Genesee County. We also bicycle a lot, and the dog park there really has become cumbersome, and it's difficult for hikers because it took out so much of the park. The other thing is we are also musicians. We play in local bands and community orchestras. We're also always looking for good venues to have concerts. Is there any thoughts of an amphitheater or a place where not only local community music groups could perform, but also maybe bring in some outside activities from a musical standpoint, or something featuring the arts, not just music, but other venues that would be attractive to bring people in as far as entertainment?
I think there's a balance with park making, in that I think we do want to set the stage, so to say, for an event or a concert, but we probably don't want it to look like an event. Like, we don't want it to look like an amphitheater per se when it's not being used that way, which is most of the time. So I think what the trick is making a landscape that can accommodate an event like you're describing. It probably does, it has electricity for portable generators and things like that. But for the most part, it still looks like a park that happens to be able to accommodate, you know, a larger gathering. So I thank you for your comments. Hi, Gary.
Hi. In 1920, John Nolan published a city planning report in 1920, which showed, now this is relative to the Flint River. The report showed a photo of kids wading in Gilkey Creek with paved concrete beds. Over the decades, the concrete has been covered over by silt, and grass naturally grew around that, so it looks natural now, even though the concrete is still underneath. Do you think something similar to that can happen with the Flint River?
The interesting thing is the water is not that deep. I think that there, we would need to do, there have to be, I mean, any kind of river environment that you work in that has kind of combined sewers that also affect it, you have to come up with a system of being able to monitor weather and monitor water quality in the river. Because kind of base flow for all these rivers is very clean. So you just have to set up the right kind of ways to get people to the river, and then kind of we just have to work through kind of the challenges of getting people over the embankments also, because they're pretty big. But we do kind of, we love the idea of actually getting people to kind of the water's edge. It's the one thing that people ask everywhere that we work, that we're adjacent to water. How can I get to the water's edge? And it's one of those kind of innately human things that we want to be able to go touch the water. So, it's a challenge, but we should definitely see what we can do. And thank you for bringing up the notion of something from the 1920s. That's pretty great. Let me go through a couple of the questions or comments that were in the chat, and because I don't want to ignore those. Vanessa on the YouTube stream asks if there are ramifications for moving the Genesee Valley Trail, financial ramifications for moving the Genesee Valley Trail. We have not looked into that fully, but it's a good question. And again, we're proposing, relocating it slightly, not eliminating, but it's something that has come up. Someone has brought that up in the past, and if plans progress, it's something that will definitely need to be looked at. Then someone asks did we engage the Flint River Watershed Coalition and Friends, non-motorized Friends Management Group. We are kind of not specifically, but that's not intentional. We're kind of working through and meeting with folks as we go. So yes, we would love to keep meeting with folks. Someone's asking where the connection would be planned for the Grand Traverse Greenway. That is not entirely clear to me, but if somehow we can, in the planning of the Grand Traverse Greenway, it would be nice if that trail could engage the confluence of Schwartz Creek and the recent park improvements that have been done there in the river, and then kind of work its way up and down the river from there. Someone's questioning shared parking at Atwood. I told you what my ambition was there. That's definitely something above my pay grade, but again, it's something that would need to be kind of talked through with various parties. Gary talked about Gilkey Creek and Kersley. And there's a comment about the Thames and the Seine having kind of channeled embankments and kind of embracing that. And I think that's definitely in the spirit of kind of where our thinking is. The other thing that's kind of worth noting, and again, a conversation that should be had in the future, is that the Army Corps of Engineers has a program called Designing with Nature. And one of their goals is to actually work with infrastructure that's in place and not fully kind of take things out as kind of environmental mitigation happens. And so it's something that's another group of people that we'd like to eventually speak to. Sarah is asking if there's enough kind of flow from the river to keep the wetlands charged. That's kind of a twofold process. One, in that you also have to line these pools. And so we can capture rainwater, and then we can, from just kind of normal, even smaller storms, that will be held in a lined pool. And then we kind of use the flushing of the larger storm events in the river to kind of clean things up and kind of give them a boost also. Beehives behind Factory 2. I kind of hinted at kind of the notion of community gardens or a pollinator garden kind of on the western half of the park. I think that would be fun also. Someone asked if the state enters into food vendor contracts with private vendors. That's a good question. I don't know. Again, the whole kind of notion of the state park here is also above my pay grade. So I'll have to park any questions about the state park. More questions about maintenance. Security comes up quite a bit. We've talked through that, and but it's something that always kind of security and maintenance always kind of need to be kind of at the forefront of what we're kind of working towards. And then, and thank you for Karma for bringing up the notion of the emergency vehicles going to Hurley. If to take the street out, it would, there's probably other folks that use Stevenson also. It would just need to be studied by a traffic engineer to make sure that actually could happen. But we think that the volumes are low enough that that's a decent possibility. You probably all recall that the bridge was actually closed for a while, and then I guess it reopened right before I visited the site this summer. Does we have a bit more time? Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to jump in and say or ask, or? Gary's back. All right.
If you look in the chat, I put in the URL from archive.org. And it shows a photo of the kids waiting in the paved Gilkey Creek section on the lower right-hand section of those two pages that I have the link to right now.
Are you seeing that on my screen, or am I?
Just click on the link in the chat.
I opened it. Yep. Let me stop sharing, and then I'm going to share my screen again, and you can show everybody.
That's it. It's on the lower right. You can see the kids. It looks like some type of
the wrong way.
You turn the page. There it is.
I was trying to zoom and turn the page. Oh, where'd it go? There it is. Huh. Cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
All right. All right. Anybody else? Another. Vanessa asks, there's a lot of mention of things for kids and families. However, our country as a whole is aging. Was this considered in the planning process? Yes. And as I started earlier on, the parks have to be comfortable for everybody, especially city parks. And so we talk a lot about kids, but absolutely, the parks have to be accessible, and they need to be exciting for seniors as well. So, and I think that everything that we've kind of, all of the pieces, probably other than the play knoll itself, other than they're probably going to be pretty great areas to just kind of, even if you're a visual participant with kids playing, everything really is accessible to everybody in the park. So yes, definitely. Let's see. Someone's saying, as is discussing the potential of the park, is this limited to Chevy Commons, or is there potential to move beyond the Commons? Tell me more about what you're thinking there. And then Eartha asks if we can consider an exercise park as well. And yes, we'll write that down. Again, as I mentioned before, I'm not an expert on the state park, and so I would need to defer to others on that. We've really been charged with Chevy Commons only, so. David asks, what's next? What happens next is that we take your feedback and we kind of finish up the concept plan. So next thing you would see from us is something that looks more like a rendered park plan with views of what we imagine, but it's always important that we kind of take the right steps along the way. We get the feedback, we hear from you before things get finalized. But I think the intention is to make a document that could kind of garner support for moving ahead with some sort of project in the future that kind of, build on the excitement of Chevy Commons, of what's happened there in the last 10 years. Okay, so happy to take more questions, but it seems like things are slowing down a little bit.
Hey, Nate, this is Brett.
Hey, Brett.
I just wanted to provide a little bit of feedback on the sports pavilion. I'm a really big fan of that, especially making it as universal of a space as possible, kind of like what you were talking, where you can do sports in there, or you could have yoga event or an art event or a festivity of any kind, just making it as large to accommodate a variety of different activities and as universal as possible, I think is a great idea. And then the only other suggestion, as far as the edge of the water, obviously I agree with you. I think you're going to have to really work with the concrete water's edge that's there. I don't think there's any chance of that ever coming up. But making that utilize, making certain spaces able to utilize that concrete edge to a degree. It doesn't have to be the entire thing. Obviously, that'd get pretty involved, but certain areas where you can, maybe there's platforms. I know you showed a few pictures of, of like docks or whatever, where kids were fishing off of them, something like that, that kind of goes out over the concrete's edge. At certain points, I think would be very beneficial. A few of those throughout the course of the park would be awesome.
Good idea. Barry's got his hand up.
Hey, Nate. This
Hey.
is Barry. Just a quick answer to the state park question.
Thanks for bailing me out.
So The state park is proposed to include Chevy Commons, all of Riverbank Park, and all the riverfront, all the way up to Vietnam Veterans Memorial Park, north of Hamilton Avenue. And I guess I could answer any other questions regarding the state park as I know it today.
Right. Jack's got something else.
So Barry, you just said that's from basically Kettering's campus north, upriver to Hamilton. Is that the span of it?
Yeah, north of Hamilton to Vietnam Veterans Park.
Very good, thanks.
Nick was asking if there are plans to redevelop Riverbank Park, and the answer to that is yes. They are much further along than kind of the thinking with Chevy Commons. Faith has a question or a comment.
Hey, it's just a comment. I see that somebody is asking about the property near Kettering, and what's not clear if they're talking about the part on parcel A or if they're talking about the part that Kettering actually sits on. Could you speak to that a bit, Barry?
I guess repeat I don't know what the question is.
They want to know if you're including the part of Chevy that is by Kettering. I think both sides of the river, if you'll just talk about what parts are included in Chevy Commons, that is west of Chevrolet and on either side of the river.
Right. So it'll only include parcel A, which we would determine as west of Chevrolet and south of the river would be included in the state park. There's a little what we call parcel A, but really just west of Chevrolet and not part of the Kettering campus.
Thank you.
All right, any more takers? And truly, my email is there, and you can send anything kind of that's eating at you later about that as well. We appreciate all your feedback, and and thank you for your time. Hope that everyone's staying safe, kind of midwinter, and we look forward to kind of working through more of your feedback today and kind of finishing up the concept plan and something that hopefully everyone feels like they had their voice heard, and that kind of it begins to kind of build excitement for your park. So I thank you. Your time is valuable, and thank you for spending an hour and a half with us tonight. We truly appreciate it.
Thanks, Nate. We appreciate your efforts.
Thanks, Barry.
Yeah, thanks again. This was a very interesting discussion.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Melissa. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Very welcome.
You know, Nate, nothing happens in my office unless Melissa okays it.
I was glad that to remember that to email Melissa and say, hey, can you let me in?
Okay, we are done, and I will send you the recording as well as the list of people that have attended. We had consistently 20 people viewing on YouTube and 27 in the Zoom chat, so that's good.
Cool.